You're listening to episode 292 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the official podcast of the Secular Buddhist Association, a grassroots-driven effort to answer the needs of secular teaching and practice for contemporary society. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the SBA website has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Though the podcast focuses on core practices from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. David Wilmore speaks with us today about Pranna timers, combining incense, art, and meditation. Hi everyone. I want to thank you for supporting the Secular Buddhist Association with your generous contributions. Because of that dana, we're able to continue offering this podcast, the discussions on our website, secularbuddhism.org, and of course our live online practice circle. And if you haven't yet, you're welcome to visit the website to show your appreciation, as we appreciate you listening in and sharing your own voice in this exploration of the Dhamma in our lives. A long time ago, I happened upon my favorite timer for meditation, and it's never been replaced. In fact, I have bought a few more for myself and given others as gifts over the years. What's unique about this is how it works, that it works, and the handcrafting that goes into each piece. And for me, the light scent of incense is nice too. David Wilmore took Buddhism 101 in 1991 at Swarthmore College, where he received his BA in philosophy in 1992. Buddhism's emphasis on experiential as well as intellectual understanding and the possibility of liberation has led to a lifelong exploration of the path and a love of Zen literature and Vipassana meditation. David's retreat experiences began with a Goenka retreat in Nepal in 1996, followed by over 100 days of retreats, primarily with Spirit Rock's teachers in Northern California and Shinzen-young in Southern California. David goes to Mission Dharma in San Francisco, where he works as a lead volunteer and sits on their board. He explores meditation further through his blog and is the inventor and founder of Pranna Timer, a unique incense-based meditation timer specifically designed to support daily practice. So, sit back, relax, and have a nice incense tea. Our guest today is David Wilmore. Dave, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So glad to be speaking with you. This, for me, has been years in the making. And as I was mentioning before we started, I'm going to fanboy here a little bit because I really admire the work for years. It's been a part of my daily practice for a long time. And so I'm just very excited to be able to speak with you about this. But let's start by having you tell us about yourself. When did you first encounter Buddhism?
I first encountered Buddhism in college, and I literally took a Buddhism 101 class in my senior year of college. And I was a philosophy major, so I had gotten interested in some interesting questions about consciousness and what's really going on here and what's it all about. And I found that a lot of the Western philosophy tried very hard to answer those questions, and they came up with a lot of fancy words and fancy arguments and long doctrines, but they never really got all the way down to it. And I was introduced to Buddhism, as I said, through this one class. I had a really fantastic professor at Swarthmore College, and it really opened up for me a whole possibility of a way to explore those same questions experientially, as well as through writings and through art and through movement and all these other ways that Buddhism does explore the world. And I really was taken pretty quickly with it. I really thought it was an amazing exploration. I then took a seminar that next semester, and so I immersed myself in it a little bit more and learned a lot about Buddhism through that. The different turnings of the wheel of Theravada and Mahayana and Vajrayana, and got introduced to how Buddhism had come into, not only into the West, but how it had moved through the East first and changed with the different cultures that it ran into. From there, after school, I ended up reading zero Western philosophy after that, but I started reading a lot of Zen and, Shunryu Suzuki and DT Suzuki and just a whole lot of different pieces, and was just fascinated by it. I'm really taken by it. I find that when I read those things, it helps to really put me in that mindset as if I had been sitting or as if I had been practicing. If you really read it and soak in it at the same time, it's a lot like practicing, I think. So I did that for a number of years. But then really my practice took a major turn. I went to Asia in 1996 for a 3-month trip. And I was determined to do some kind of practice there, though I didn't know what it was going to be. And when we were in a line in Kathmandu to get our visas renewed, there were some people in front of us that were talking about a Goenka retreat they just did, 10-day Goenka retreat. And that really rang the bell. I sort of thought, oh, that sounds just right? It's a good, solid piece of time, but it's not going to an ashram forever or anything. It's something I can do. It's something I'm interested in doing. And I'd read enough and done a little bit of sitting on my own. I'd gone to a Zen center for a 30-minute intro, and I was sitting a little bit trying to get a daily practice starting at that time. But then I ended up signing up for and going to that Goenka retreat. And I think that was a real life-changing experience for me. That's the only one I've been to, the only Goenka retreat anyway that I've been to.
How was it transformative to you?
It was transformative to me because I had just experiences on the cushion that I couldn't really explain. And to this day, I'm not so sure I can explain them very well, but I've learned a lot about what happened then and what's happened since. I think I just got into a really very concentrated state and experienced a flow through my body that seemed to me to touch on, I don't want to say an otherworldly, but some kind of level. I think I experienced something that I can only really describe as something that happened in my energy body. That was the best I could do at the time anyway, and that's still a pretty decent description of it. But getting the mind to be really concentrated and actually quiet down a tiny bit. Now, of course, this is my first retreat, and my mind was bouncing all around, and my body hurt a lot. At that time, I really thought the whole exercise was going to be much more mental. In my early practice, I had done a lot of reading and had a lot of concepts swimming around in my mind, and I guess I didn't really know what practice itself was really going to be like. And the fact that it was so physical, and it was really all about being in this body at this time, and being with the body sensations just as they are. But then it unlocked some other things. It kind of released some other experiences that I don't think that I would have had just naturally. Anyway, that really got me interested in retreats. And I don't know if you've ever taken a Goenka retreat, if you've ever done one.
Not a Goenka retreat, but many others.
Right. So in this one, and I believe many of them, you're actually watching videotapes of Goenka in the evenings as Dharma talks, like on a little TV that they would roll in.
Yeah.
And it sounds pretty hokey, but the formula that he was able to transmit there night after night was so well polished or thought through that it was really quite fantastic. And it's been, millions and millions and millions of people have seen that exact program. And I remember a few of the things that were said there. And I think towards the end, it was recommended that if you want to pick up this practice and do this practice, that you should do a retreat at least once a year. And, that really kind of stuck with me, and that really hit me. And I came back to the States, and I looked for some resources around here. That was right at the time that I moved to the San Francisco Bay Area. I was coming from LA, and I found Spirit Rock almost right away. And I found Howie Cohn, who had a sitting group in San Francisco. And so I started sitting with Howie on Tuesday nights, and I started going to Spirit Rock. Another friend of mine lived down in LA still, and he had been someone who I talked about, philosophy and Buddhism, and was somebody I could really kind of go toe to toe with and really get down and, talk about the meaning of the world and what was going on and what it was all about. And he had found Shinzen Young down in LA. And so in my earlier days, I would do a retreat up here at Spirit Rock, and then I would go down and do a retreat with Shinzen Young and kind of go back and forth. And really in that period from, 1999 till 2012, I guess I would consider myself a retreat Buddhist. And you've probably talked to a lot of people that I would think that would fall into that category somewhat. Maybe that's a subject we can get to as kind of a secular Buddhist. I think retreats really are one way that Buddhism really seems to have taken hold here in the West in a powerful way, in a really effective way, I believe. So anyway, so I did a number of retreats up here with Spirit Rock and down there with Shinzen, and I really just loved it. I think I was falling into the trap that Ram Dass talks about just a tiny bit, where he says his practice really shifted when he learned that it was all about getting free instead of getting high. Right? I think I would go to these retreats and I would have these experiences, and I would be, wow, this was amazing, and describe this and describe that, and this thing was going on and that thing was going on, and how and I would have that experience. And then 6 months would go by, I'd put the next retreat on the calendar, and I would start to sit more regularly, and I would kind of build my practice up for that retreat. I would go to the retreat, I would just have these experiences, I would kind of come out of that, I would sit for a while, and then my practice would sort of wane again. And that, that was just kind of a pattern. And I think it was an okay pattern. It wasn't bad.
And a pretty common pattern that's not unusual for people to do.
And I imagine it is pretty common, because you fall into your normal ways and you sort of practice slides a little bit, but then you get excited about it. In 2012, I had a retreat in Joshua Tree that really changed it all for me, only in the sense that it really clicked and deepened. And I found that I got into a very good state of concentration. And I think that I started to explore some of the elements of samadhi, even though I was there doing vipassana with Spirit Rock teachers. I think that was another actually leftover from Goenka. Goenka has you follow your breath right at your lip for 3 days to start off. And so it really is concentration practice. I mean, a very strong concentration practice. And I know that, Vipassana has kind of the scale from pure Vipassana to pure Samadhi, and there's everything in between. I think that my early sitting really started me off way on the Samadhi side of that scale, and really focusing on the breathing and the breath, and just getting fairly concentrated in my sitting, and not varying too much, trying to just stay with that. And that's, I think, what happened in Joshua Tree in 2012, is that I started to see some of the fruit from that and experience a mind that could quiet down, a mind that could stay on its object. And then I experienced a lot of the sukha, the sweetness, the real light, wonderful feeling. And everything clicked in a way that the momentum was enough that when I would get off the cushion and walk around, I still was feeling in that state. And it would take something to knock me off of that as opposed to effort to stay in that groove. My mind had found a way to balance there. And that really kicked me off in, making sure that I went to the once a week sittings. I'd come back to Howie. I'd actually bounced back and forth a little bit between San Francisco and Berkeley, and I hadn't been with Howie that whole time, but I started really going back weekly and making sure I went every week. And my daily sitting got very strong. I was sitting every day. And that's when I started that blog, actually, on Pranna, because I really felt as if I'd finally gotten settled on the path. And I wanted to share what led me there. And then I wanted to try to have a place to essentially journal while I was going to continue my practice, because I could tell it was going to continue to unfold. Mm-hmm. And so it was kind of a neat exercise just to share that out. And it's been really good for me too, to write and journal. I think journaling is a neat thing to do with your practice, because it makes you reflect on it a lot in order to post something. And journaling online as a blog makes you not only reflect on it and write a piece, but then go back and kind of read it and think about it, think it through a little bit. And it makes you very self-conscious in a good way
right.
about what you're writing and what you're putting out and what you're saying. And it also gives you a nice record to go back to and see what was going on in your practice. When you stumble on things that have happened before, you can pick those up again and go back and see what you had read. It's a nice thing.
It is interesting seeing a trajectory of ones. If you do journal, I know Jason Siff recommends that with his teaching, and I've found it very useful to look back over the years of, oh yeah, when I was on this jhana retreat or loving kindness retreat or Satipatthana retreat, what was that like? And just seeing what some of those experiences were. And also, as Dave, as you were describing having these experiences and all this stuff coming, I think back to starting the Zen tradition, where really from day one, they were very clear. That stuff's going to happen. And we call that nakyo. These are distractions. Just come back.
Yeah, I think that's right. So trying to kind of bring us up to the modern day, my daily sitting got really strong. I got more and more involved in Mission Dharma, which is Howie's sitting group. And they pulled me in as a volunteer there, and then we formed a nonprofit. So now I'm on the board there, and a lot of my kind of Dharma work is through them and with them. And I think I've started to round out a little bit more my kind of my Dharma life by practicing with the Sangha and devoting myself to the Sangha in the sense of service, volunteering there and doing the board work, but also meeting other people and meeting other friends and people that are on that same path. And then Howie has allowed some of his more senior students to teach the intro class. And so that has been very good for me. Teaching an intro to Buddhism class got me to open my eyes to Buddhism in a whole new way. It's very easy for people, I think, to rattle off, the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path and some of those lists, but not really feel the impact of them.
You need to represent it with depth and integrity, and teaching helps you really learn, because you're checking yourself, because you're going to be standing up in front of others, and there's some responsibility with that.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So learning why is the Four Noble Truths at the center of Buddhism? As kind of a retreat Buddhist, as I said, well, you go on these retreats and you try to follow the rules and you sit and you have your experiences and you feel very authentic in the sense that you're getting to know yourself. You're getting to know who you are. You're getting to know what's in your mind. You're getting to know that you're not your thoughts. You're getting to know that you can handle pain in your body without reactivity. You get to know a lot of things by just keeping going to retreats and having those experiences. But learning about the Four Noble Truths allowed me to turn the corner a little bit in a way that it wasn't so much about having the experiences and kind of hoping to have the aha moment that was going to unlock the freedom, but rather understanding what it is that's keeping us bound and trying to see into it more directly.
Mm-hmm.
So trying to see how is grasping and letting go the key to finding that freedom, right? So the formula is so boiled down and so perfect in the Four Noble Truths that putting that more at the center of my practice and my understanding of Buddhism has been really key to understanding what it's all about.
It sounds like you had a shift from the reaching, the striving on a more experiential level. And bear in mind, that's not to demonize experiences. They can be great and very helpful and transformative, to recognizing that there may be some value in, okay, how do I meet the world right now that's here in my own experience in this moment without having to be focused on this external thing that hasn't happened yet in this very unique circumstances of a retreat setting where I'm not living my daily life. It's still incredibly valuable, and you still need to go on retreat. And it's that turning point of, I'm bringing this into my regular life, and the structure of the Four Noble Truths and Eightfold Path is what can help us really get grounded in, here's how that shifts and changes how I meet the world.
Yeah, I think there's something in that. I think I've always understood that there's the work that you do on the cushion, and then when you come off of the cushion, your experience flow continues, and you can continue to be with it. I think I've always understood that practice can continue during your normal life and out, kind of in an informal way. But I guess what those Four Noble Truths and Eightfold Path kind of exploration really did for me was give me a methodology for getting unstuck.
Yeah.
But in a really specific way, not just I'm going to be with my present experience, I'm going to let go of everything, and I'm hoping somehow that gets me unstuck.
Mm-hmm.
To understanding what the project really is, I think the way the Buddha laid it out, which is live ethically, consider these ideas, like mull over these ideas, try to understand what the path is about. I think right understanding is fascinating because while it's not all meant to be an intellectual exercise, I think you have to grasp it at some level, really truly what you're doing. And
you need to start up here, and your brain eats it and it soaks into your bones.
Yeah. I see it as a sort of the whole Eightfold Path I see as a spiral that kind of just keeps going and going around and gets a little deeper each time. And different pieces of it might be highlighted at different times of your practice or of your day or whatever it is. But ultimately, the more you hone each piece of it and avoid some of the bigger pitfalls, you can see all of it a little more clearly and a little more clearly and a little more clearly as your practice develops. It's such a cool map. It's just a really, really neat map.
Glad so many of us have it in our different ways of engaging with the Dhamma.
Yeah.
So let's shift a little bit. I want to ask about the timers. And for those who are not familiar with Pranna timers, you might want to pause here and go to pranna.com, Pranna.com, to take a look and see what we're talking about here. How did this design idea come to mind? Were you already someone who was a woodworker? Did that come after? What was that like? What happened?
I got back from that big Asia trip from the first Goenka retreat, and I really wanted to sit more on my own. And I didn't have a really good way to do the timing. I guess that was an experience where someone else was taking care of that. When you're on a retreat, or even if you just go to a Zen center, if you go to a structured Sangha, that aspect of sitting is taken care of.
There's a doant. There's someone to do it for you.
Exactly. And it doesn't seem like a real big deal. But my understanding of meditation at the time was I guess, clear enough to see that if I used a watch or some kind of clock that I needed to check, that was a real distraction that really mattered. That the mind would start to wonder, okay, has it been long enough? Is this how long I was going to sit? And you would then have to consider how long you've been sitting, guess at how long the time had been. Are you going to open your eyes? Are you not going to open your eyes now? You're going to peek at the watch. And I guess I understood enough about concentration and quieting the mind then that I knew that was really introducing that little ripple of thought and then activity, and then especially opening your eyes, really does affect your state of concentration. So I thought, well, I want something else to do the timing. And the things that were available to me just close at hand were, like a kitchen clock that would tick, alarm clock that would have a real abrupt noise. There were no iPhones. I didn't have a cell phone back then. Some people did have cell phones back then in 1997. But all the timers I had available to me had either a very jarring sound or they made sound during the course of the timing. And those things didn't seem appropriate to me. So I thought, how can I possibly ring this bell in the right amount of time, right, without using any of those things? And I was just playing around with some of the things that were literally on my desk in my room. And what I ended up doing is kind of funny, but I took a singing bowl. I think I got on my Asia trip. Anyway, I had a singing bowl sitting on my desk, and I had a lamp, just a little lamp that was sitting next to it. And I took the stick and I tied it to a string and I hung it from the lamp. And near the top of the stick where the string was connected, I hooked in a little loop. That was actually, I think, an old earring from the old days, from like 1986, right? And then I pulled it back and I put an incense stick into a jar of pennies and pulled it back, and I put the incense through through that little loop. And then I thought, all right, this might do it. So when the incense burns away, it'll let go of the stick and it'll swing and it'll ring the bell. And that will be silent, and it's going to ring this bell that I want to ring. So I did that and it worked. And I thought, okay, well, how can I refine this a little bit? So I did, instead of it being, jury rigged with all these different things, I grabbed a few pieces of wood. I had a very basic drill. To answer your other question, I had no woodworking experience whatsoever, apart from sixth grade, which is not to be undermined though, right? Because your early experiences and your exposure to things, that's what lets it happen later on. So I grabbed some wood, and I had an arrangement where there was a piece of plain wood that was vertical, and then I had some rods coming out of it. I drilled a hole in one of the sticks so that it could swing on that rod instead of swinging on a string. And then I had the incense going vertically and a little wire coming out of the back so that it would connect like that and let go and ring the bell. So that also worked. And I could move that stick anywhere along the incense to give myself a different amount of timing. So that was pretty good. That was design number 2. And then I just played with that design over and over, and I kept making the timers that I was doing and refining them little by little as I was doing it. And I started to really enjoy the process of creating and refining the design, trying to figure out what were the elemental pieces, what was really necessary in the design. And then I got to a point, I call them moon timers, because of the big shapes of the pieces of wood that were used. And they were lovely shapes. They were like circles that had a little crescent cut out where the bowl would go. So the circle would go right up to where the bowl actually was. Really beautiful shapes, really nice, but they were really, really hard to ship. It was really hard to ship them because I had figured out putting the stick on an inclined plane to make the swing more gentle and controlled. But if you shipped it all together, there's a ball bearing in there, and the axles, I was making them by hand, and it would all fit together. Anything that would happen during shipping would totally destroy it because they were delicate. And so I thought, all right, well, that's not working that well. So how can I refine the design yet again so that I can take the stick off and put it inside the body to ship it? And so I created this one that was kind of similar to the ones as they are now. It was longer, and the back end was open, so you could take the stick out and slide it into the back, and that was pretty good. And then it occurred to me that if I had the incense dish that lifted off, you could knock off the incense and empty it without touching your setup. That became very important, to be able to do everything without moving the actual setup of the timer. Because as you know, once you kind of get it set up well, it just makes the exact same sound every day, which is really nice. And you
Right.
can get it to be a little bit louder. You can get it to be a little bit softer just by kind of moving it around a little bit.
Just a little small fractional amount makes a world of difference with the bell ring. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted it to stay stable. So I designed it so you could take the dish off and get rid of the incense ashes. And then I thought, well, if the dish is coming off, I can put that whole stick right into the next layer of the body underneath that incense dish. And then the whole thing packs great. You know, you can ship it really easily. And I got it all down to where it basically takes one board foot of wood, and you make these 4 ovals, you cut them, you form them, and you can put it together. So it's been a really, really fun project. I've really enjoyed doing it quite a lot. And as you know, now I send kits out for other people that like the idea, that either enjoy woodworking or want to build it to save a little money, just as a way to get it out there a little more, so that it's a little more open, kind of a little more open source for people. And then there came a time when we moved into a new house, and we had our daughter, and my workshop was sort of defunct. And so I didn't have a way to make the timers. And I reached out to, I had been sending out these small parts kits with plans so that individuals could make their own timers. And someone reached out to me, Michael Lanning from, I think he was up in Washington. And he said, "Hey, I really love this project. I really want to make these. What can we do?" Because I had patented the idea. I actually got a patent for the whole thing, because I was really gung-ho on it, especially in the very beginning. I thought maybe this could be it for me. I could really launch my line, and this could be my career. It didn't turn out that way, not yet. But it has been an amazing project this whole time. Anyway, so Michael reached out to me, and I said, well, why don't you go ahead and make them, and you can make them and sell them, and you can sell them through the site. And we'll call you a guest artist, and that way you can make them, and you can name your price. It's up to you, how much you want to charge for them. I imagine if you charge less, you'll sell more, and if you want to, you can charge a bunch and just sell a few, and that'll be fine. And we did that for some years. And then another fellow from Texas, Sid Trest, said he was interested in doing the same thing. And so he's been making timers for the last couple of years now. And I have just now reestablished my workshop. We've moved back to Berkeley, and I've just now established my workshop. So I'm hoping to get back into making the timers myself, although it's been some time. I haven't made a timer in quite a few years.
And for folks who are listening to the podcast right now, we're doing this over Zoom. So I have a view of a bit of workshop behind Dave. So I'm excited to see this happening again. Dave, I wanted to ask, what's been one of the more gratifying aspects for you of working on the timers over the years? What do you like most about this?
As I described earlier, as kind of a retreat Buddhist, going on these retreats and then being away for a little while, the timers are really a good way to really keep me connected to sitting. Using the timer myself, using my own timer, making the timers for other people, and hearing about other people's experiences with the timers, and kind of the appreciation that has come back. Some people really like not having something digital, and I do too. But to be totally honest with you, in 1997, if I could have downloaded an app to do my timing, that would have been it. I would have done that, and I never would have started this project. But now that I have started the project and been making the timers, I really like that they're not digital. There's something really special about setting up a physical object. The incense is real nice. That feels really good. It belongs in the tradition. You're ringing an actual singing bowl that has an authentic acoustic sound to it. So the aesthetics of the project have been really great. I think I could have been a designer in another life, or maybe a future life. Who knows? I really liked going through that design process and building something that was as good as I could build it, and really take it through that process and make it more and more beautiful as I went along, to get it to a place that I really enjoyed producing these objects that just looked really, really nice, and they were smooth to the touch. They performed this really simple function. The function itself is interesting to people. Everyone talks about it being sort of a one-step Rube Goldberg device, because it is. It really is. It's kind of an odd way to do timing, but it works really, really well. So that's been a fun little exploration. But the way the project has kind of kept me in touch with sitting has been really neat. It's kind of functioned that way in my life to kind of keep the pot boiling for this long and never really let me get too far away from sitting as a practice. Has been one really cool aspect of it.
It's one of the things that I've liked best about in my own sitting practice and using the timers, because it's a big part of that, is there is a more visceral physicality to taking the time to set up the incense through a small loop, making sure it's in its position just so. And those simple movements, as you mentioned, they have a profound effect on the ringing of the bell itself. But that little bit of touch with ritual, with mindful awareness of doing this setup is, for me, a terrific foundational start to a formal practice period. And so I found that to be not so when I can take my iPhone and hit a button and I sit and I haven't really connected yet. I haven't really arrived at that sitting. And it's very different with the timers. So that's been very helpful to me and mine. I also want to ask, you have quite a few things, not just the timers themselves available on the site. There are a few other things too. And I want to just have you share just a few of what's there.
Well, as I mentioned, I allow people to build their own timers from scratch, and I give away the plans for free. People just need to give me their mailing address, and I will print out and mail a set of plans to them. That allows them to, literally lay the plans right onto the wood and cut them, build the whole thing. Then to support that process, because I think that's been really neat. I really enjoy sending those plans out to people, and I've been contacted by people from all over the world. And in fact, the timers themselves have gone all over the world, which is also really, really gratifying. If 1 out of 10 of them uses the timer the way you use it, then that would be an amazing blessing of sorts. So in order to facilitate or help people that have received the plans, I will send a kit, a small parts kit. And what that is all the little parts and pieces that people don't have to reinvent. There's not too many, but there's a ball bearing in there. It's a totally regular skateboard ball bearing, but I work hard to find ones that are really good for the timers. There's a lot that are a little sluggish or a little sticky or maybe even a little noisy. As I said, it's really important to me that the timer is 100% silent before the bell rings, that you don't get any glimpses or hints that bell is going to come. Right. I feel like that really pure bell sound out of nowhere is sort of one of the nice classic experiences in meditation.
Yeah, it really is. Instead of even that moment of clattering ball bearings would be terrible. It's just sort of appreciate it.
There's some ball bearings that are very, very fast and would be great in a pair of roller skates or a skateboard or something, but they have a like a hiss to them, and that little quarter turn. That's all
it takes.
Those bearings in the timer, you can hear it go. You just hear it. So I try to work hard to get a very silent bearing in there. Probably the most specialized piece that comes in the small parts kit is the axle. And these little axles I designed, and I originally would make them out of wood, and then I made them out of wood with a little tin layer around where it goes in the bearing to try to make it fit right. And then I moved to making them out of aluminum that I would do a really horrible job, but a functional job on my own tools, trying to spin down this piece of aluminum to be just the shape. Since then, I've found some other people that can duplicate them much better than I can. So I have people make those axles, and I have a batch of them. I actually have a guy making it sort of by hand now, who is a friend of Sid Trest's in Texas. So that was a nice little connection to have him come on board. So I send the bearing and the axle, I send a little bit of embroidery thread, which allows you to wrap. There's a certain part of the stick that always makes contact with the bell. And if you wrap that in with embroidery thread, it cushions the hit in just about the right way. I experimented with a lot of materials on how to do that best, but if it's just wood against the bowl, it's too sharp a crack. So the embroidery thread dampens it in a real nice way.
Yeah, I found that with just using a bell, and I have a ringer here, and when it's wood, and folks who are listening, it's okay, but with the part that's softened with something around it, there's a softer tone. And so just that attention to detail there that you put in it makes for a much, much better sound.
Yeah. And I teach you in the instructions on the timer instructions, how to whip wrap the embroidery thread onto the stick so that when you're done, there's no knot at all. It's just pure thread, which kind of comes out pretty neat. And then there's a few other just tiny parts. There's a couple very tiny little pins that hold the bearing in. There's another bigger pin that really is more decorative than anything that holds the bearing in kind of an aesthetic way. And then there's a little tube that the incense actually goes into the dish through this little tube so that you're not burning the incense against the wood. But I think that's it. That's all the small parts. And then the incense itself.
Could you say a little bit about that? That's one of the things I wanted to share, because that's one of my favorite aspects actually of the timer is the incense that was included with it has remained my favorite for forever.
This is an incense that I actually have. I wouldn't say I'm a connoisseur of incense, but I've tried a lot of different incense for this project in particular. And there's a couple of reasons that I settled on this one. It's called Shin Mainichiko, and it's not particularly hard to find. It's a Nippon Kodo, I believe, is the manufacturer. It's a large manufacturer of incense out of Japan. But the reason that I like this particular incense, I definitely like how it smells, and kind of it's smooth. It doesn't have a very sharp attack. It doesn't have a super duper floral flavor that might cause you to kind of agitate the mind. Right. It's really mellow. It's really nice, but it's a smooth sort of flavor. But the sticks are also very long.
Yeah.
And if you want to sit for an hour, you can do that using these very long sticks. But they have no bamboo, or they have no center to them. So they're very easy to break with your fingers at any length, which is a very important part of the timer usage. The way I set my timer up, I pull the stick back and I put the incense through the loop and then into the dish. And then across my fingers here is about 3 inches. And each inch is 8 minutes. So I will sit often for my daily sitting, I'll sit for a 24-minute period. And I'll put my finger right above the loop, and then right where it comes to the top of my hand, I'll snap that incense. Or if I want to sit for a 48-minute, I'll do that. I'll put my fingers up and then up again and then break it right there. And it's remarkably accurate. It's very interesting if you have a measuring tool. How do you do it?
It's fascinating hearing you talk about this. There's, as you said, a full stick's about an hour. And what I do is I'll take a stack of about 4 of the sticks, and as best I can, just kind of eyeballing it, I'll break them in half. And that gives me half an hour of a good sit. And it's one of the things I do like about it is that it's not exact every time because there's a little bit of a burn difference with humidity and altitude and all these other conditions that may vary from day to day. So that, and my own breaking of the sticks is never going to be perfect. And that's okay. That gives me a little bit of, I'm noticing anticipation. My head says it's about that time now, and I can notice them. And it's variable enough that that's something I can work with. So it's actually contributing to how I practice with it.
Yeah, that's nice. I think the inexact, I'd say for a 24-minute sit, it's probably plus or minus a minute. But you're right, that inexact time measurement, there's something very organic about that in kind of a Zen Japanese art wabi-sabi kind of way, where it's precise enough to get the job done, but don't get too precise with digital timing. So that is kind of a fun feature.
That is a really good way to put it, the wabi-sabi way. I hadn't thought of it that way. You're right.
Meditation timing. Yeah, that's pretty much how it goes.
So you've already mentioned a bit about your guest artists, and I just wanted to ask if there's anything else you wanted to share with the listeners.
I would just encourage people to continue their practice, and if you don't have a practice now, get something started, even small, it's 5 minutes. And if that doesn't appeal to you or somehow isn't feeling possible now, then read something. I've just found my practice to be so important in my life. And, these meditation timers, sending them out to people has been really touching for me to know that I've touched other people's practice. And that time on the cushion, it's not that there's something mundane and then there's something separate that's sacred in this world, but there are things that are special and there are things that are beneficial, that are really helpful. And my meditation practice in my own personal development has been probably at the top of that list. And so I would just encourage people, I'm sure if people are listening to your podcast that they're interested in the topic anyway, but just keep going. And if anyone ever wants to call or reach out about the timers, if you did take a look at the site, if you have a question or curiosity, please just email me. I love to communicate and talk to people about the project or about sitting meditation at all. It's a fascinating topic for me, along with being a very, sort of beneficial, useful practice. I'm totally fascinated by it. So I'm happy to share my thoughts, whether they are very simple thoughts about how the timer works or anything deeper.
Great. And for those who are listening, Dave does really mean that. We've had some really good conversations ourselves aside from this one. And also take a look at the blog that is linked on his website. Read through that. There's some really good material there. And the thing that if you do have some, let's say, stagnancy in your practice, this is a nice way to make it special. To make it something you look forward to as a gift to yourself. And that's always a benefit and an encouragement and a help. So our guest today, David Wilmore. Dave, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been great. Really fun.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the SBA website at secularbuddhism.org, and you'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. Discussion about this episode can be found on the episode page itself, along with show notes. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. The music for The Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizen Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are linked on the SBA site on the About podcast music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on The Secular Buddhist.